his whole family. He went when he was 8. Every February 16th was Kim Jong-il's birthday. And in the prisons in North Korea, that's movie day. And everyone stops working and they get to watch propaganda films. And every April 15th, which is the great day of the sun, Kim Il-sung's birthday, they would commute the sentence of one family. They would free one family from all the big prisons, 5, 15, 25, 14, 18. And so Kang's family in Japan had enough money to raise a bribe to get their family to be picked. And so it's very rare human beings make it out to tell these stories. So I was like, I couldn't believe, like, as I lived my happy life in California, people were living under conditions like this. Another thing I, was forced to think about when reading this book was the Korean War, which is a war that our country fought, but that we don't talk about too much. There's a lot of movies about Vietnam and novels about World War II and things of that nature. But for some reason, that war hasn't really penetrated our psyche. And when I was young, there was a TV show made about it called MASH. It was really about drinking martinis, actually. But so I was like, whoa, the Korean War. I started reading about that, which was quite fascinating. And just Korean history I found interesting. A 4,000-year-old culture. I had Korean American and Korean students and colleagues. And so I just began reading a lot about North Korea and what this unusual place was. Most of the books, though, were about like the military dimension and economics and political stuff. What I wanted to know was like, what's it like to be born in North Korea, right? How do you fall in love in North Korea? I was really curious about that. Like, how do you date? I was curious about like, what's it like to be a dad? Because I was a dad, like what would the lives of my kids be like? And I wondered, what's it like to be a writer in North Korea? Like, what would I write about? It turns out the answers to a lot of these questions weren't really in the books. I discovered after like a year of just reading, at night before bed, I would just read about North Korea. I discovered that the stories I was curious about were online. And so this was maybe, 12 years ago. And there were a lot of Christian missionaries that were working with defectors, and NGO workers and aid workers. And the thing about North Korea is that it's a single state without free enterprise. So every single human being works for the government. And there's no Starbucks, and there's no Burger King, and you can't open a lemonade stand there. Every human being is told by the government what their job will be. And so there's no independent media, there are no magazines, there are no writers who write books as you know them. There's no radio stations. In fact, the radios in North Korea come without a dial, because you don't need to adjust the station. They're pre-made, it's a government station. Right? And actually tampering with your radio so that you can get radio broadcasts from South Korea is a kind of offense that gets you put in Yodok. Right? So it's a place in which there's no opportunity for humans to express themselves in ways that we would know. So I kind of discovered that North Koreans weren't allowed to tell their own stories. And that's an interesting thing in the world today. We have a pretty open world. And people from wherever they are allowed to tell their stories. It also means that if you tell a story about North Korea, the North Koreans probably aren't going to hear it, and if they do hear it, they're not going to be able to answer back. So that means we can make any kind of portrait of North Korea that we want. And while I was studying North Korea, people would make, I don't know if people have seen Team America World Police. You could make a comedy about North Korea or a cartoon about North Korea. But we wouldn't really tell jokes about Rwanda or Syria, because you might meet someone from Syria one day. You wouldn't joke about tragedies in other parts of the world, but people could about North Korea with impunity. So there were a lot of portraits. I mean, most people think it's a place of madness or evil or clownishness or all kinds of strange things. And it was very difficult to know what their lives were like. So I started going online and finding people who had interviewed North Koreans and who had taken their stories and just put them out there. And they were stories that were very different than the stories that, were the stories of my life. And there were stories of like the famine in the late 90s and what people had to do to survive there. There were stories about people who had to inform on one another or choose to be informed upon, about scavenging at night to survive, about living in a world where they had no choices, which is a pretty strange thing. As I started reading these stories, I don't know what it's like for you, but when someone tells me a story about a difficult episode in their life, something they had to go through, like you kind of have a duty maybe to like reciprocate with a story, like tell them something about yourself. That's how we share. But I couldn't do that with these stories, and I just kept hearing stories about losing family members to the famine, about having no health care, about executions in their towns, about people being sent away and disappearing. And those stories were like stones that I kind of had to swallow and walk around with, during my normal happy American, everyday life. And I think that started to develop an urge to maybe write about this. And then I started reading North Korean propaganda. I started reading the stories that the North Koreans tell about themselves. And they have a website called Rodon Shinmun, which is the Workers' Party paper. And the North Koreans translate their main newspaper, the New York Times, into English for the world every morning. And so every morning I started getting up, and online I would read the news out of Pyongyang, which was quite fascinating. It was a kind of news that, I remember one of the first headlines I read said that Kim Jong-il had been walking along the Taedong River, giving some advice to some workers by the river, and a flock of doves suddenly formed above him and flew into formation so as to give him some shade on a hot day. Front page news. What would happen when Kim Jong-il would walk past snow? It would melt, of course. And when he would walk past flowers, they would bloom. Very interesting. Now, the North Koreans are just as smart as we are, just as curious, just as funny. I would argue they are more funny. And the defectors I've met have been the funniest human beings I've met on the planet Earth. A dark humor, I would say, but a humor nonetheless, and that's through translation. Also, on the front page of the North Korean newspapers I read is, there's a David and Goliath story between America and Korea because of the Korean War, and they see America on the other side of the world as the source of all of their problems, and we are the great evil in their lives. So whenever there's bad news in America, it's on the front page of the KCNA or the Rodon Shinmun in North Korea. And so when there would be a report in America out, like from, our HUD commission that about how many humans are homeless in America, it would be front page news in North Korea. And I remember reading one morning in 2005 in a newspaper in North Korea that 1 in 6 Americans had food insecurity. I went and looked it up. It was true. And then it was a report that just been released. And I went and looked at my newspaper, and that was not a front page story, that hunger was an issue in the United States. And that really made me start thinking about propaganda and about stories. So, I started reading more about North Korea. First of all, I encourage you all, if you do one interesting thing today, I would go to the Rodon Shinmun website, RODONGSHINMUN, because, I don't know if you know this, Kim Jong-un has a daily photo blog. Do you know that? And all the pictures we have in our newspapers and on TV of these weird shots of like Kim Jong-un riding a ski lift all by himself, or Kim Jong-un inspecting a bomb, those are all his pictures, because we don't have our reporters there. These are the pictures he puts on his photo blog every day. It's called the Supreme Leader's Daily Activities. Of course, everything that comes out of that country is crafted to make an impression about that country. It can't be trusted the way an independent news can be trusted in our country. But it's interesting to see how they see themselves and how they see us. I started reading books from North Korea. They do have novels, but they're written by people who are hired and whose lives depend on protecting the regime in a certain way. I started reading some nonfiction books, and it made me think about the narrative of America that I had slowly absorbed and maybe never questioned. And so we have a story, the American story, and it's very simple, and it's the basis of all our novels, and all of our novels, or all of our movies, and our lives. And it's a story that goes like this. Every human being is unique and special and valuable. Do you believe that?
Yeah.
Maybe. Do you believe that? I do. I think people are fascinating. I think every human being I meet is really a pretty interesting person. Humanity, I don't care for so much. But individual humans, I really like. And so, but this is a pretty big premise, that every human life is worthwhile. Secondly, this is another pretty big part of the American story, is that you are the most important person in your life. That you are the center of your life. And I think as we grow up, as we go from being kids who are dependent on others to growing up, you may love your mom, you may love your wife, you may love your husband, etc. But in the end, to be an American is to be the central figure in your own narrative and to be the most important person. Which, when you think about like 350 million people who all think they are the most important person in the story of their lives, that's kind of problematic, fascinating. That's why Americans are interesting, I believe. And you know, when you think about the narrative of America, we have a pretty simple storyline too. Everyone's valuable, you're the most important person in your life, and here's your job in the story of you, is to imagine a best possible future self, right? And your job is to become that self. But first you have to think, what do I want to be? Who do I want to be? And we ask kids from when they're very little, right? What do you want to be when you grow up? Who do you want to be? What do you want to do in life? We're always encouraged to dream, to imagine, to project ourselves in some future place. And then our job is to think of all the paths that might get us to our best possible future self, and then to start a voyage. Maybe that's the military, or maybe that's college, or becoming an athlete, or whatever it takes, finding mentors, traveling, and going down this road. And the road is an uphill road. We know it's not an easy road. To become your best possible self, to climb the mountain where awesome you lives, to get up there and to meet future awesome you, well, there's going to be conflict. You're going to have to overcome obstacles. You're going to have to dig deep, look from within, become challenged, overcome, and you climb that great mountain. And in the American story, it doesn't matter if that awesome you is up there or not, because you have been challenged, you've overcome things, you've transformed, and you're different, and your life is now meaningful. Maybe you've gained insight, you've grown, maybe you have wisdom. That's the story of being an American. And it's the simple plot of all of our books. But reading about North Korea and reading their stories, it was the exact opposite. There's one central character in the story of North Korea. What's his name? Kim Jong-un, that's right. That means there are 23 million secondary characters. And the job of a secondary character is to illuminate profound aspects of the central character. To say, oh, you've done it again, Kim Jong-un. Oh, you're awesome, dear leader. The job of secondary characters is to work hard and to sacrifice. And in reading books about North Koreans, which of course are official and state sanctioned, It was all about individual people making sacrifices, working twice as hard to produce the needed item, running at machine gun bullets to protect the state, of everyone giving up, giving up, giving up, giving up, so the main paternal figure then could take care of everyone. And, you know, at this point I hadn't really met a defector yet, but when I did start to meet defectors, they would talk about being in middle school and in high school, and having people from their province capitals and from Pyongyang come into their schools, like this school. A team of people would come from Pyongyang, and they would test everyone and ascertain their aptitudes. And then they would decide, you're going to become a fisherman, you're going to be an engineer, right? You're going to be a soldier, and you're going to be a ballerina. And that's it. Your survival now depends on how well you fulfill that position you've been given by the state. And actually, what you desire, what you dig deep to discover, is irrelevant and a hindrance to your proper performance for the state. And so, as you go down the road and you've been put in a canning factory, daydreaming all day about being a writer and a ballerina isn't going to get you anywhere. You're not encouraged to do that at all. So in America, the story we tell about ourselves leads to like a meaningful life. And I think we're all encouraged to live a life that's fulfilling and that fulfills our desires as who we are. But in North Korea, like, you're not encouraged to do that at all. And open communication of your thoughts can be used against you, so people tend to keep their thoughts very private. And so it was a place in which you had to choose whether to survive or to live, right? If you decided to live, which means to have a meaningful life, the life that you define means probably escaping or running afoul of the state, which threatens your survival. And if you decided to survive, say, yes sir, no sir, you're gonna have a probably pretty okay life. Most North Koreans are relatively poor, but live in a fairly simple society and don't have problems, right? But it's not their lives they're living. They don't really know who they are according to our standards. And I thought that paradigm of making humans choose to have a fulfilling life or a life of survival was quite fascinating. That's one thing I wanted to write about. And then I met my first person from North Korea, and he had been an orphan in North Korea. And I just, you know, he talked about having to make decisions, about losing his family, about having people he loved die, about having to make the kinds of decisions we don't have to make in this world. I call it the Sophie's Choice. There was a novel by William Styron that was like really powerful to me. And in this William Styron novel, Sophie is a Jewish person in World War II, and she gets sent to a concentration camp with her 2 kids. And just as she gets off the train, the Nazis are there, and they're like, you can only have one child, pick which one. And she just comes off the train, the Nazis are there, and they're like, you pick one or we'll kill them both. And she has to pick a child that she takes with her, and the other child goes off to die. And it's a pretty tough novel. It was made into a movie. But this dilemma is a dilemma that I see in a lot of our novels and stories. That a human being has to make a decision that will define them for their entire lives. And I think we like those moments in our movies and in our novels, but not in our lives, right? We don't really want to make a Sophie's Choice, but we want, through literature, to contemplate it. And that's one of the great things about literature, is you can learn what it is to suffer loss without actually losing something. You can learn about death without having to die, right? So, one of the things I learned by talking to North Koreans is that at least the ones that made it out of North Korea, that's my sample group, all of them talked about having to make a Sophie's Choice. Like all of them. And that was like, nice dramatic thunder. And, you know, that was something that, you know, I don't have to do. You know, I don't have to make that Sophie's Choice, living in California, having a good job at a university. But there are people in this world that do have to make those choices, and those are stories, you know, that I really, really want to tell. I can talk about North Korea forever, and I would just put you all to sleep, or enthrall you, depending on your caffeine level. But I want to take some questions. I think I've spoken for 20 or 30 minutes, but I do want to hear about people and field a couple questions. Abby, do you have one?
Yes. So in your novel, The Orphan Master's Son, it seems like nearly every character ends up in a prison war camp. Is this actually based on what you've seen and heard in North Korea?
Okay. All right. Let's How about this? This is a great question. Here's North Korea. Here's the DMZ that separates South Korea. Korean culture is about 4,000 years old. So when we look at like the partition of Korea on the large scale, it will be a strange asterisk to think, oh, for a few decades this country was separated, but it's a big separation. When I first studied North Korea, and I sort of was new, and I first started writing about it, I didn't realize that an experience a human being would have in different parts would be very different. If you met an American from Mississippi or Alaska or Manhattan or Long Beach, you would meet very different people, right? And I discovered that was very true about North Korea. Here's the capital, Pyongyang, and in North Korea, every human being has a Songbun rating, which is your family loyalty rating. You know that number better than anything else in your life because it's going to determine your future. And so you have to have a high family loyalty rating to live in Pyongyang. If you live in the countryside, there's 15 provinces. Some of these are really landlocked. Like if you're in Gangwon province, you're very far from the border to China. But let's say someone wanted to escape from Gangwon. Why wouldn't they go south? Yeah, why wouldn't they cross the DMZ? Landmines, thank you. The United States has, and we won't report officially, between 3 and 12 million landmines in the DMZ. That's the sole reason we cannot sign the Global Landmine Ban Treaty, one of 2 nations on Earth. For the DMZ, the United States invented a special kind of landmine that has ceramics in there as instead of metal, and it's made of plastic. Why would we make a landmine out of plastic and ceramics? So they can't be detected. It's called a gift to the future. 12 million undetectable landmines. So if you live in Gangwon, you can't just cross here. To get out of North Korea, you have to cross all these other districts to get to China, and you need special passes. And so people never leave the districts in which they're born, except to go to the capital for indoctrination sessions and for their military service. The odds are that, like, if you're in one of these landlocked provinces, the odds of your defecting are very rare. And the truth is that all we know about North Korea are satellite photos and human stories. And human stories can't be confirmed or verified. It's very difficult for journalists to actually write about North Korea because you can't confirm the facts of anyone's life. But for a fiction writer like me, nightmares, rumors, human stories, that was the most valuable thing. So in studying North Korea, I discovered that everyone who lives in Pyongyang has a certain kind of life. For one, they have a real education system. If you live in South Hamgyong province, you're indoctrinated. And in school, you learn to memorize the speeches of Kim Il-sung. You don't learn anything of value in life. In fact, that's the sad thing when you get out. It turns out you didn't learn anything in all those years in school except to obey, right? But if you live in the capital, they have a real medical system, such as it is. They have real education, and the central bureaucracy that is there. And so you're in the elites. You're in the top 4% of the nation. You could go to movies, even though they're propaganda. You could go to opera, even though it's state-sponsored. But you're not going to die of starvation in the capital. And so the people who live in Pyongyang are the rarest defectors on Earth. because they know they have it made. And when I was in Pyongyang, I saw people who were bussed in from the countryside by the thousands every day to bow down before the statues and things of that nature. And I could see their teeth. I could see their skin. I could see their waistlines. And I knew what their lives were like. And so do people in the capital. So in terms of like what it's like to live in North Korea, we know very little about Pyongyang because people don't leave it because they have it relatively made. If you live in the center up there is about Baekdu, and the Yalu River goes this way, and the Tumen goes that way, and goes straight from the north, you have to cross the river. And in the winter, it's frozen, you can walk right across. In the summer, it's very low. In the spring and fall, it's a very treacherous thing to cross those rivers, and many people die. But if you live in Dandong or Sinuiju or any of those that's a big, long border. Your cell phone can hop onto a Chinese cell phone tower. How many cell phones do you think are in North Korea? 12? Thousands? We know exactly, because the North Koreans can't make their own cell phone network. They have an Egyptian company called Orascom that's publicly traded. There's 3.1 million cell phones in North Korea. But they're not cell phones as you would think of them, of course. But if you live along the border, if you haven't crossed, you know people who have crossed, and the people on the border, what they know is that life in China is actually very hard. There's a repatriation agreement with China and North Korea. And so if you cross and you're caught, they send you back to North Korea. And depending on your Songbun rating, it's either back to a slap on the wrist if you're an elite, or to your great peril if you're unloyal to begin with. So the people who live along the border know, life ain't so great there. And because all the people in China there know you can be sent back with one phone call to the Chinese authorities, that's how you become a farmer's wife. That's how you become a slave in a Chinese factory. That's how you become sex trafficked, because you can be sent back to your peril at any moment. I don't have a big map up here, but the first countries that have repatriation agreements with South Korea, it is Mongolia, if you can visualize that. That's a 1,500-mile journey for someone who doesn't know a foreign country. And you have to cross the Mekong River and get to Thailand. That's 2,500 miles. So we don't know how many North Koreans go into China and get stuck there. We only know how many make it to South Korea, which is about 1,200 a year. It's an epic, epic journey. The people who live along the border are pretty savvy about this. It's the landlocked people we don't know. And to answer the question, when I first started hearing the stories of defectors, I didn't understand that 2/3 of all the people who escaped North Korea come from a single province, North Hamgyong, which is where Chongjin is. And think about this. Think about leaving your country. Think about leaving America. It's not like, oh, I'm going in exile or all this or that. To leave means to never come back. Forever. To leave everything you know. To have no communication again with anyone you've left behind. To never have any updates at all. To be totally gone. And that means every time, if you grew up here in Texas, every time you thought of Texas, your associations, your memories would lead to nothing. And you would have everything you've ever known cut off from you. It's my sense that nobody leaves North Korea. Their families, their communities, unless they absolutely have to, unless it's life or death. And so, North Hamgyong turns out to be the life or death province. I know that we think of North Korea as a place of total dictatorial control, which it is, and yet it's the farthest place from the capital. And the capital really doesn't care what happens to people out there in the wild east. So they put some of the worst gulags up there, Camp 5 and Camp 25. Chongjin is a decaying old Soviet factory town. And so when the famine hit in the mid-90s, people in Chongjin got the least amount of food and the least amount of supplies. And they had to do the most dangerous things to survive. Scrap old plants, trade on the night markets, cross illegally into other provinces, crossing to China. And so when I started writing what took me a while to figure out is the stories that I was initially getting were the darkest, most terrible stories. And the stories of people who live normal lives in North Korea weren't being told. I'll answer the next question more briskly.
No problem. Okay, what is the most shocking or memorable experience that occurred during your research trip to North Korea?
I don't think they let people come to North Korea unless they're pretty sure that you're going to have a very controlled trip, that you won't see anything that casts the regime in a negative light. But they also are so insulated, they don't know what looks weird to people outside. So, you know, hunger is a serious thing there. North Korea is 85% mountains. They have all the timber and minerals and natural resources. South Korea is 85% farmland. They have all the food. The country's meant to be together, and it only functions together. And so when Kim Jong-il came to power in 1994, he decided to increase farm production by doing terrace farming in the mountains. So the first thing he did was have people cut down fleets of trees. And of course, you probably know this instinctively, that all these trees keep the soil in place. And then when the rains came in '95, there was terrible flooding and actually wiped out tons of farmland because of this. Kim Jong-il, of course, had the Minister of Agricultural shot because of this. That's how he dealt with stuff. It turned out in '96, the rains were worse and the famine worsened. So he had the Minister of Agricultural's body dug up, re-executed, and buried again. That's how things work in Korea. So what was the question? Was it shocking to us all? So even in the capital, hunger was an issue. So going around the capital, like in the median of a road, there would be corn planted. No one would waste those square meters at all. On people's rooftops, they had corn planted. And the president of Hyundai gave 50,000 head of cattle to the North Koreans to help mitigate hunger. But it turned out they were corn-fed cattle and couldn't eat anything but grain, and actually worsened the hunger problems there. So when I was there was the grass in the meat campaign, and the government was championing animals that only ate grass, like goats and rabbits. And so everywhere I went, there were little kids singing and dancing about grass in the meat, let's have some rabbits, grass in the meat, goats are our friends. Just like that. But so on the rooftops of Pyongyang, people have been hauling dirt up to grow grass. And as you moved around Pyongyang, you could see that there were goats on the roofs walking around. You know, that was pretty surreal to me. Yeah.
So for our last question, what were your first thoughts after finding out you won the Pulitzer Prize?
Well, they don't tell you. They're probably worried that people will decline it. You know, a couple of people declined the Nobel Prize. Sartre and Camus declined it. So someone just, it was funny. I was, I was working on an essay with an editor at Esquire magazine, and we were Google Docking a piece that was going to run. And my phone started to like light up, and my Facebook thing was beeping, and my wife was going through chemotherapy at the time. I was really worried about her, so I thought maybe she was trying to contact me. And so we were Googling Docking. I said, I'm going to check my phone and see if my wife has got a problem. And so he said to me, like, is she okay? I said, yeah, I got a text that said I won the Pulitzer Prize, you know? And he said, congratulations. And for some reason I snapped at him. I said, don't say that! And I said, sorry. He said, can I Google it? And I was like, okay. And then he said, it looks like you won the Pulitzer Prize. And he said, what do you want to do? I said, well, we're on deadline. So I just kept editing the story.
Thank you so much.
what Dr. Johnson shared about the opportunity for humans to express themselves, and that there's no opportunity for Koreans to tell their own stories, and the value of, if you were good at finding a voice, you were duty-bound to tell those stories to those who are not so fortunate or good at that. I like the phrase that you shared. It said, stones that I had to swallow hearing the people's stories. Regarding propaganda, looking at the underlying beliefs behind any group's propaganda, and our underlying beliefs of Americans, that we are at the center of our world, that our job as special and valuable and unique people is to become the best person we can, and how that differs from the experiences in North Korea, specifically, where the great leader is the center of everyone's life, and is everybody else is secondary in that story. The consideration that we are not in our life stories typically forced to make potentially tragic decisions and have those dilemmas facing us, but the importance of literature and creative outlets for us to explore those thoughts, to think about the impact of those without having to live them. And last but not least, through the narratives that he heard, remember that any place, whether it's here or there or anywhere, that there are always vast differences among people, and not to generalize around those or beyond those differences. So I want to thank you for your participation. I want to thank one more round of applause for Dr. Johnson and for having you. I thank you for putting on your best face and really following this date. We hope that tomorrow through the workshops you have a chance to really engage, potentially with Dr. Johnson, but one of 29 other great presenters. At this time, I'm going to have us dismiss in the following way. If you are in the balcony, you may go ahead and start leaving. If you are